Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the interview dialogues of the Trumpet of Truth. I'm your hostess, Zhongxin. As we all know, the Chinese Communist Party's religious policy and China's human rights conditions have been roundly denounced by democratic countries and international human rights organizations. China's definition of cult and its use of cult as a pretext to attack religious beliefs have particularly drawn serious doubts and criticisms of the international community. In this episode, we want to start a discussion on the CCP's definition of cult and on the issue of the CCP's condemnation of the Church of Almighty God under the pretext of cult. Our guests today are Professor Massimo Introvigne, founder and director of the Center for Studies on New Religions in Italy, and Associate Professor Holly Folk from the University of Western Washington of the United States. Good evening, professors.
Good evening.
Let's start with a background video.
In 2017, from June 24th to 28th, and from September 14th to 15th, the Chinese Anti-Cult Association, a branch of the Communist Party, had held 2 international anti-cult academic conferences successively in Henan and Hong Kong. The central theme of the conferences was to discuss about the CCP's definition of cults and why the Church of Almighty God had been condemned as a cult organization by the CCP. The CCP's media outlets, Kaifeng Network and others, reported about the June conference. A report captioned "American and Italian experts attended Zhengzhou Anti-Cult Academic Conference" claims that experts expressed that from this research study, sufficient understanding has been gained on China's religious and anti-cult policies, dispelling previous misunderstanding about the issues of cults in China. At the same time, the conditions of religious belief in China are observed to be favorable. The grassroots freedom of belief is well protected. It was the Western society's lack of understanding about China's religious policies that had given rise to the earlier misunderstanding.
Professors, both of you have been invited to participate in the 2 conferences as expert scholars. So, what are your opinions on the contents of the report by the CCP's media on the June conference?
Well, I believe the article reflects the perception of what happened from a Chinese side, but our perception is probably very much different. Surely, by going to these conferences, we gained a better understanding of what Chinese law says about Xijiao. By the way, we prefer not to translate as cults, as in the academic community, the word cult is no longer used in the West. And we understood the decisions of the Supreme Court and the administrative policy about the Xijiao. But we also conveyed very clearly to the Chinese participants to these conferences that we do not agree with this policy. We do not agree with the very vague definition of Xijiao. We do not agree with the normal rhetorics used against cults in the West and in China. And we believe that the situation prevailing in China, both about Xijiao and about all forms of unauthorized religion, actually constitutes a very serious danger for religious liberty and a serious breach of the international obligations China signed under international conventions. Now, that should not be new for the Chinese side because they were told in so many words during the conferences.
Well, it is true that we went to China. And I don't think I can endorse any statement or any aspect of the statement in the press release. I think that one thing that we did conclude as a group was that there's a great deal of misunderstanding between the West and China on Chinese policies of religion. And I think it's unfortunate that there were many missed opportunities for understanding. We did not have a lot of access to talk to people. I think for us to be able to draw better conclusions about anything, you need to be able to actually talk to people. And I think the most unfortunate thing was I think that we, in several moments, both in June and September, we found ourselves talking past each other with different understandings and different priorities. And that actually makes me very sad and hurts my heart, because I think the world works better when there is freedom of religion and also freedom of information.
Professor Folk just mentioned that you only had little chance to talk with the local religious groups during the research study. In another report by the CCP's media, we read that by arrangement of the relevant CCP departments during the conference, the invited delegates traveled deep into Zhengzhou, Kaifeng, Shangshu, Xinyang, and other places, made extensive contacts with local religious groups and individuals, and conducted an in-depth research. Since both of you have attended the conference, how do you feel about what was stated in this report about the research activities?
Well, it's unfortunately not true that we were allowed to do a deep research. That's too good for us. We did some religious tourism. We visited the Shaolin Monastery and some other monasteries. We visited one single three-cell church and a tiny remnant of a Jewish community in Kaifeng. So we cannot say that we know more than before after this trip about, say, the house churches, because we didn't visit any. We cannot say that we know more about the common believers, because we didn't interview any. So we saw one small part of the official religious scene, but we didn't see any part of the non-official religious scene.
The CCP invited you to do research study, but didn't let you contact any house church or interview the Christians at any house church. Did it strike you as odd that the CCP would restrict you from contacting the house churches? If there is really freedom of belief in a country, why aren't foreign academic experts allowed to interview and contact the house churches? What is the CCP's purpose for doing this? In fact, there is no religious freedom in China. All house churches have met brutal suppression and persecution. The conditions of the religious belief in China have been worsening in recent years.
After Xi Jinping came to power, under the banner of sinicization of Christianity, the CCP has wantonly arrested and severely sentenced those priests and rights defense lawyers who resisted the demolitions of the cross, using all kinds of methods to ban and persecute Christian house churches, especially the Church of Almighty God. For the conditions of religious belief in China, the United States has repeatedly complained and considered that the Chinese Communist Party seriously violated international law regarding freedom of belief. In the International Religious Freedom Report for 2016, released by the United States Department of State in August this year, China was listed under countries of particular concern for the 18th consecutive year. Many human rights organizations and human rights experts have also condemned the CCP for its persecution of religious beliefs that has reached maniacal and hysterical levels.
Under this backdrop, the CCP invited renowned Western scholars and professors to China and held 2 international anti-cult academic conferences. So, what do you think the CCP's purpose and motives were?
I can only make some educated guesses. Of course, one guess is they really wanted to hear different opinions. That's the good interpretation of the events. And the worst interpretation is they just wanted to take pictures with us. And then say, you see, we are so good that we even invite Western experts. So we hear all the opinions, and then there are all the other possibilities in the middle.
Your answer is very humorous. The CCP has always focused on propaganda. In an internal secret document of 2017 about striking against the cults, the CCP stated, "Mobilize influential voices of American and Western experts, scholars, journalists, and patriotic immigrant leaders to generate favorable media comments overseas." The intention of the CCP's statement is obvious. It wants to use the voice of the Western media to create the basis for public opinions for the CCP's religious suppression. One of the themes of the two conferences held by the CCP is to discuss about the definition of cult. Professor Introvigne, you are an internationally renowned expert on new religious movements who has studied the definition of cults for more than 30 years. You are an authority in this area. You have also mentioned before that the CCP's definition and policy of cults poses a serious threat to the freedom of religion. So, how do you see the CCP's definition of cults?
Well, I believe cult is an old word. As I say, it's no longer used in the academia except by small minority of academics. The large majority does not use the word cult because we know it's used by some governments in China, in Russia, and elsewhere just to attack some religious minorities. We know it's used by some private interests to defame some groups, so we don't use the word cult. I will personally advise those speaking Chinese to translate Xie as criminal religious movement, not as cult, because cult is a word which creates a lot of misunderstandings in the West. So criminal religious movements are religious groups which systematically, not only once, advocates or justify or promote common crimes. By common crimes, I would exclude the crime of being a cult. That's Article 300 of the Chinese Criminal Code, but that's not a real crime. It's an imaginary crime. I'm speaking of very real crimes such as rape, terrorism, homicide, even gross economic crimes such as international money laundering or international tax evasion. These are real crimes. And if a religious group systematically advocates and practices these crimes, terrorism, violence, rape, child abuse, international economic crimes, this is a criminal religious movement. I would strongly advise, and that's what I did in the conferences, everybody interested in the issue of Xie in China to abandon the old category of cult and to focus on criminal religious movements. And the test is, can we prove that they committed common crimes such as terrorism, rape, child abuse, violence, etc. That's the test. And commit systematically.
Mm-hmm. Professor Falk, what do you think?
I think at this point, new religious movement scholars agree that the word cult is almost always reserved and used for a religion somebody does not like. Cult is a label that a group in power uses to disempower a group that they want to put outside of society. And that also, I think, is very unfortunate. I think one of the interesting but frustrating things about our research this past summer is we found ourselves discussing and even debating what is a xiejiao and how can you use the word cult. The word cult and the word xiejiao has become very, very multivalent, carrying many meanings and being very slippery, and it makes communication very difficult. This was, in all seriousness, I think, the primary point of discussion when we were in China in our summer meetings, that we burned through an enormous amount of time simply arguing over definitions, and I think that that's unfortunate.
Well, it's unfortunate, but it's also the crucial point. I mean, I have been in the year 2011 the representative for combating religious intolerance of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. That's a sovereign international organization of 57 states, not including China, but including Russia, United States, Canada, and all the European nations. And based on this experience and on 30 years of research, I believe that towards religion there are two attitudes. The totalitarian and non-democratic states will punish people based on their beliefs. Say, we don't like what you believe, you go to jail. And the democratic societies and the governments that really respect the international conventions on religious liberty will only punish people on the basis of behavior. You kill somebody, you go to jail. That's okay. Even if you are a member of a religious group, that's not an excuse. You organize the terrorist attack, you say God told you to do so, you go to jail. You rape people, you abuse children, even if you say God told you to do so, you go to jail. But democratic states will only punish people for behavior, for what they did. Non-democratic states punish people for their belief. And that's all the difference between democracy and totalitarianism. In a democracy, nobody goes to jail because of his or her beliefs.
Yes, both of you professors have deciphered the CCP's true purpose in defining cult. By labeling the churches it cannot control, the CCP implements brutal suppression on them, under the pretext of cracking down on cults. This is a consistent practice by the Chinese communist authorities to maintain their dictatorship. There are countless Christians who are hunted and rendered homeless by the CCP. Professors, other than China, are there any governments in the West that convict certain sects as cults?
Yes, I believe there is a big difference, though. I'm very critical. Some colleagues, I think in particular Professor Jim Richardson, we have studied the different attitude of government toward so-called cults. And there have been countries, including France, which have prepared a list of cults. But, there is a but. Sometimes the Chinese government tried to say, oh, we do just the same that French did. But in France, being in the list of cults doesn't mean you go to jail, or doesn't mean you can be tortured or sent to a re-education camp. Yes, the list is bad. I don't agree with this list. If you are on the list, sometime an hotel cannot rent a room to you, saying we don't want to deal with you, you are in the list. Sometimes you can have problems in buying television space for your advertisements, but nobody goes to jail normally. So that's the big difference with China. The situation in China can be compared to the situation in Russia, because Russia has recently constructed, through a number of decisions of the Supreme Court, a category of extremist religious organization, which is very similar in vagueness to Xiejiao in China, But it is also true that Russia has been condemned by the European Union, the United Nations, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe because of its policy against so-called extremist religious organizations. And I believe it will be in the best interest of the Chinese government not to be associated to this international vituperation against Russia, which is going on right now. Of course, it's also true it's in the best interest of the Russians to associate the Chinese, to find some friends who say, oh, we do the same. But I believe that's in the interest of Russia, but it's not in the interest of China, because Russia has now a horrible international image from the point of view of religious liberty. And so if the Chinese were wise, they will try to not to be associated with Russia in this respect.
Professor Introvigne, you mentioned that there are several countries that convict religious groups. It is really unfortunate. However, the CCP still uses the cult label to legitimize its practice of persecuting religious beliefs. As early as 1995, the CCP had included the Church of Almighty God and other Christian house churches in the so-called cult list, of which the Church of Almighty God is one of the most persecuted religious groups by the Chinese communist government. Another theme of the CCP's two conferences was the Church of Almighty God, in which the CCP claimed that one of the main reasons for convicting the Church of Almighty God was the McDonald's homicide case of Zhaoyang Shengdong. Let's take a brief look at this case.
On May 28, 2014, at a McDonald's fast food restaurant in Zhaoyuan, Shandong, Zheng Li Dong and 5 other people were asking customers on premise for their telephone numbers. A female customer who refused to provide her telephone number was killed. After the incident, the CCP swiftly laid the blame on the Church of Almighty God. Using anti-cultism as pretext, the CCP implemented more brutal repression and persecution of the Church of Almighty God and other Christian house churches throughout the country.
Professor Introvigne, for years, you have been concerned about religious-related violence cases, and you have carried out an in-depth research on the McDonald's homicide case. In late September this year, you published a report on the investigation of the McDonald's homicide case of Zhaoyang Shengdong in the Journal of CES-NUR. This research report has received extensive attention and recognition of the academic community. Would you share your findings with us?
Because I was invited by the Chinese Anti-Xie Jiao Association, I took an interest in the most horrific crime, that's the McDonald murder in 2014, and on the basis of documents published by CCP-related sources, not by the Church of Almighty God, but the official Chinese sources, my conclusion is the group that perpetrated the McDonald's homicide in 2014 was not part of the Church of Almighty God. And I believe all the other incidents should be studied one by one. It's very easy to defame or label a group based on generic accusations or stereotypes. Scholars normally don't work in this way, but try to study all the single incidents and slowly come to conclusion about these incidents one by one. There are a number of significant documents about the McDonald's case, but the most relevant documents are the statements the defendants gave in court and in some interviews they gave to official CCP-controlled media. And here there are at least 3 points clarifying the issue. Point number 1, Zhang Fan, one of the defendants, was executed, and one of the leaders of the group was asked whether she contacted the Church of Almighty God, and she answered she would have liked to, but since the church was banned and underground, she was not able to. So that's are the very words of Zhang Fan. We don't need interpretation, it's completely clear. The second element is we know, and that's the very core of the story, that these people entered a McDonald's diner, asked for the phone numbers of some people, and when one lady didn't give the number, they pronounced them an evil spirit like in 30 seconds. Now, for those who know the Church of Almighty God, your criteria for recognizing an evil spirit are very complicated, and surely nobody in the Church of Almighty God will recognize an evil spirit, let alone take dramatic action against it in 30 seconds. And the third point is the core belief of this small group was that the Almighty God was one soul in two bodies, and these were Lu Yinchun and Zhang Fan, the two leaders of the group. Now, obviously, the Church of Almighty God believes the Almighty God is a different person from these two ladies of the small group. So I believe it's crystal clear from the very documents published by CCP-related sources that the group of perpetrators of the horrific crime in Zhaoyuan was not part of the Church of Almighty God.
Yes.
First of all, I've known Massimo for many years now, and I am very impressed by his ability to do research. And I am not as conversant in the timeline or the facts as he is. But I'll make an observation in general about religion. Now, leaving aside the McDonald's case for a moment, if you have a city of 300,000 people, basic math or statistics says there will be a murder sometime in the course of a year. And that may have absolutely nothing to do with the church or any other ideology they belong to. You know, that I believe Massimo and that the people who did the murder were not believers at the time that they did the murder. But even beyond that, I do not think that there has been any evidence produced to say that the Church of Almighty God orchestrated this. In all seriousness, one of the largest religions in the United States is Catholic. The second largest religion in the United States is Baptist. And it would be very easy to say that most murderers in the United States are Catholic or Baptist. And so, you know, you have to sort of think, even if somebody has a religious identity, that may not be particularly linked to their behavior. And in the case of the people who did the murder, I think that they were very crazy people. And I think it was very, very tragic that this woman died. But I think that if anybody is going to make statements blaming a religion, there needs to be a stronger chain of evidence to say that the religion or the religious ideology or leaders in the religion were causal. And it does not seem to me that evidence has been produced so far.
And it would also, of course, doesn't make sense for the Church of Almighty God to go around, ask for phone numbers of people and killing them in diners where they are eating their Big Mac. That will not be, for a large church, a way of making itself more popular or more believable. So the idea of a conspiracy doesn't make sense. And also it doesn't make sense in the light of the theology of the Church of Almighty God that forbids forcing people to convert. I believe the only possible connection is they read some books of the Church of Almighty God. We don't even know this for sure because they quoted the wrong titles during the trial. But as I said, if they did, when asked whether they had physical contact with the Church of Almighty God, one of the main defendants said we could not find the church. So she, Zhang Fan, denied they had any physical direct contact. Perhaps they read some books, but that we cannot know for sure. But of course, if you will be responsible for the behavior of anybody who had read one of your books, that would be a little bit strange. So the fact that somebody has in his or her possession a book of the Church of Almighty God is no direct evidence that there was a contact with members. They could simply have picked up a book literally everywhere.
Yes. Professor Introvigne, I have just listened to your findings, and you think that the McDonald's homicide was committed by a microgroup that had nothing to do with the Church of Almighty God. The perpetrators clearly stated that they had never come in contact with the Church of Almighty God. The ways that those criminals operated were completely different from the theology and principles of the Church of Almighty God. The Almighty Gods that Zhang Lidong and others referred to were Zhangfang and Luingshen of their small group, not the Almighty God witnessed by the Church of Almighty God. The facts are very clear. The Church of Almighty God did not have anything to do with the McDonald's homicide, but the Chinese communist government insisted on linking the perpetrators of the McDonald's homicide with the members of the Church of Almighty God. So, professors, what do you think the CCP's purpose was in doing so?
Well, I don't know. I'm not in the mind of the CCP, but I believe one interesting fact is that the persecution of the Church of Almighty God by the CCP started long before the McDonald's murder and even some other incidents which are sometimes mentioned. So the persecution started for different reasons. I believe the persecution started because within a general policy of hostility to religion, your religion was perceived by CCP as particularly dangerous. And once the persecution was started, these critical incidents were used to reinforce and to justify the persecution. So the McDonald's murder was a convenient opportunity to justify the persecution, but the persecution started long before. So sometime in reading even some, I would say, gullible Western media, which bought a very simple propaganda coming from China, it seems that the sequence of events was as such. First, you committed the horrific McDonald's murder, and because of this second, the Chinese authorities started putting your members in jail. But in fact, it's the other way around. The Chinese authorities were putting your members in jail for more than 10 years when the McDonald's murder happened. And so the McDonald's murder was used as a justification or support to explain to the world why your members were being put in jail or re-educated in labor camps or wards.
Yes. Since the founding of the Church of Almighty God, the Chinese Communist government has not desisted in persecuting the Church of Almighty God.
According to incomplete statistics, just between 2011 and 2013, more than 380,000 Christian members of the Church of Almighty God had been arrested for normal religious activities, such as gathering and preaching the gospel. On the third day after the McDonald's homicide, before the case had even been heard, China's Ministry of Public Security used the May 28th McDonald's homicide case as a pretext and openly announced to take special rectification action against the Church of Almighty God, even deploying the armed police and regular troops to conduct arrest of Christians of the Church of Almighty God.
Obviously, the reason why the Chinese Communist Party blamed the McDonald's homicide case in Zhaoyang on the Church of Almighty God was to find a justification to condemn the Church of Almighty God and to generate public support for the full-scale suppression and banning of the Church. The CCP suppresses the Church of Almighty God so frantically. So what kind of church is the Church of Almighty God? Professor Falk, we heard that you had done some research on the Church of Almighty God, and you know more about its teachings. We would like to know how you look at the Church of Almighty God.
Well, I see the Church of Almighty God as an authentic Christian tradition. I think what is fascinating for me about the Church of Almighty God is its intellectual and theological lineage within Christianity is very, very rich. And that is something I hope to study more.
Since the Church of Almighty God is a genuine Christian church, why would the CCP condemn it as a cult for attack and persecution? How do you look at this?
I believe the background is the CCP and the Chinese regime have tried for many decades to build a system where religions are highly controlled by the government. So your church is obviously not controlled by the government. So that's already a reason for suspicion and hostility. That applies to the house churches as well, and to many other groups. And coming in particular to the Church of Almighty God, I believe one special reason of hostility is your theological depiction of the dragon of Revelation as somewhat associated to communism and to the CCP. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that you do not advocate an armed revolution against CCP or violence. You believe that as foretold in the book of Revelation, the dragon will fall by itself, that an armed revolution is not necessary, that God will cause the dragon to fail by itself. But of course, this belief, this theology of the dragon, when read with the spectacles of CCP, it becomes an anti-government ideology. So summing up, CCP doesn't like independent religion in general, religion not controlled by the government. That applies to many forms of religion.
Yes, you are right. The CCP does not like independent religions. On the question of how it treats religions, although freedom of religious belief is openly written in China's national constitution, what's written in the CCP's internal program is to restrict, transform, and ultimately eliminate all religions. After Xi Jinping took power, he promoted Sinicization of Christianity, implemented maniacal suppression and banning of Christian and Catholic groups. Could this be the real purpose of Sinicization of Christianity? It's very clear that the purpose behind China's Sinicization of Christianity is absolutely not about promoting religious freedom. Instead, the real purpose seems to be banning Christianity and building an atheist region out of China. Could Sinicization of Christianity mean thoroughly banning Christianity and turning China into an atheist region? Will the term Sinicization of Christianity stand? How do experts like you look at it?
Well, it goes back to what I said before. It doesn't really matter if those in power are atheistic or Catholic or Muslim. There are international conventions all governments subscribe to including the Universal Convention of Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of religion, including, because in some countries they omit this part, freedom of proselytization and organizing missions is not only freedom of worship. Freedom of religion is more than freedom of worship. It's freedom of missionizing, proselyting. That's freedom of religion. Of course, freedom of religion can be limited with respect to groups who commit real crimes. If a group is a terrorist organization, let's say Al-Qaeda or ISIS, of course they are not protected by freedom of religion. But if a group does not commit common crimes, even if the government disagrees with its beliefs or finds its beliefs very strange or unusual or heretic, the government should not limit their possibility of worshipping, missionizing, and proselyting. And member states in the United Nations, including China, of course, promise to abide to international law, and if they don't do this, they are in breach of solemn covenants they have freely subscribed.
Yes.
I think in China, and also ironically in the United States and many other countries, we aspire, our goal is to have religious freedom, and I think even in China there is the goal that people should be able to believe what they want, but then the behavior part is very, very curtailed. And so proselytization, meeting for worship, these are elements which in the West would be regarded as part of religion. In China, I think they are sometimes understood as creating social unrest or spreading a dangerous ideology. If you have a religion private and you can never speak about it and you can never act on it in a religious sense, now leaving crimes aside and simply talking about worship activities, if you are forced to be entirely private and keep your things to yourself, you're not really able to do your religion, right? You have a private fantasy about religion, but you don't have real freedom.
Well, we thank Professor Introvigne and Professor Falk for sharing their views on the CCP's definition of cult with us today, as well as exploring the reasons for the CCP's attack and suppression of the Church of Almighty God. We thank our two guests for participating in our interview dialogues. Thank you for watching.